It's Tuesday, October 28th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, Trump's health and his constant talking about a third term. And it's not just him, but a lot of people around him too talking about this. And while he and others in the MAGA world have been trolling/soft launching the idea of a 2028 Trump campaign, it gives us a glimpse at some real thinking that's happening behind the scenes, and some lawmakers are already shrugging their shoulders at an idea that is pretty much illegal. On top of that, we're learning new things about Trump's health that complicate this idea of being a three-term president, if it's even possible. So I'm going to explain the three-term stuff, whether Trump could actually be president again, and what that has to do with the conversation around his health. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show, whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. You can do that for free right now or get access to bonus content as a paid subscriber. That is just $5 a month. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. All right, let's get on with the show. You know, I've always got a cup of coffee next to me while I record these episodes. The studio is in the basement and it's kind of cold, especially as we head into the fall and winter here, but a good cup of coffee is one of those small pleasures which I think we could all use right now. It's why today's episode is sponsored by Afuera Coffee. Afuera Coffee takes your coffee experience to the next level with their specialty, hand-selected beans sourced directly from sustainable, certified Rainforest Alliance farms in Central and South America. Rich, volcanic soils infuse each batch with unique, vibrant flavors. Afuera Coffee's commitment to excellence starts at the farm, where they work closely with local farmers practicing ethical and sustainable methods. Whether you prefer a bold espresso or a silky smooth light roast, their versatile range caters to all tastes. Now, I tend to go with a lighter roast in the morning and then switch to an espresso in the afternoon, but however you manage your own crippling caffeine addiction is, up to you. All Afuera materials, from coffee bags to mailers and postage, are either compostable or recyclable, and 5% of all sales go to conservation charities, which is obviously pretty cool. And right now, you can get 15% off your entire order with the code MIMS25. That's MIMS25 for their best discount offer right now, and you can only get it from Make It Make Sense. The podcast does get a cut of some of that, but honestly, it'll just go right back into ordering more coffee, so you'll be helping me stay awake to make even more things make sense. Again, that is MIMS25 at checkout at afueracoffee.com. That's AFUERA.com. Taste the excellence with every sip with Afuera Coffee. All right, let's get on with the show. On Monday this week, Trump was on Air Force One heading to Japan for a state visit. Now, never mind that the president is leaving the country as the government is a week away from a record-setting shutdown, or that in just 3 days, 42 million Americans will lose the ability to buy food with their food stamp benefits, or 6 million people will lose access to health care. But anyway, Trump is aboard Air Force One and says this about being a three-term president.
I believe that. I would love to do it. I have my best numbers ever. It's very terrible. I have my best numbers.
So you're not ruling out the third term?
Am I not ruling it out? You'll have to tell me. All I can tell you is that we have a great group of people, which they don't.
Okay, so Trump's numbers are not the best ever right now. The latest Gallup poll has his approval at 41%. Right around 40% has proven to be his basement for his numbers, but those are 6 points lower than where he started this term, although they are 3 points higher from where he was at this point in 2017, where his approval rating was in the high 30% range or so. But then a little later, Trump was asked about running as J.D. Vance's vice president and then having Vance step aside so he could serve again, Trump meaning. And he more or less ruled that out for now. Listen.
On how you might try to serve a third term is that you could run as the vice president.
Yeah, I'd be allowed to do that.
Is it the White House's or the White House counsels or his legal position, I guess?
You'd be allowed to do that, but I wouldn't do that. I think it's too cute. Yeah, I would rule that out because it's too cute. I think the people wouldn't like that. It's too cute. It wouldn't be right.
So, for starters, it's too cute for Trump. He's all of a sudden laboring under the idea of how breaking the law would look. Second, it's not his style. he doesn't want to be second fiddle to anyone and leave the door open for someone like J.D. Vance to not step aside. But third, and most importantly here, it's illegal, based on the readings of the 12th and 22nd Amendments. So let's break this down. The 12th Amendment deals with presidential elections. It's basically the how-to section for how the president is elected and certified through the Electoral College and then Congress. You know, the thing that Trump and about a third of the House and Senate tried to stop from happening in 2020. Now, that number will come back a little later, so remember that. But it also deals partially with the line of succession to be president in the 12th Amendment. What it says is no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States. Now, when it was written, the 12th Amendment was talking about people under 35 who weren't born in the U.S. and have lived in the U.S. for at least 14 years. That is what requires you to be president. But that changes after FDR is president for 3 terms and served a partial 4th term before dying while in office. That is when we get the 22nd Amendment with the support of then President Harry Truman, who was FDR's vice president. The 22nd Amendment is shorter than the 12th, but is the one that people have been arguing about lately, even though it straight up says that no person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. That's the first sentence, and I want to say that I'm reading directly from the Library of Congress's annotated Constitution. It clearly says it's illegal for Trump to be elected to a 3rd term if he's the one running for president. And now you might hear people say, well, it's actually about consecutive terms and not serving consecutive terms, and that's just not in the law here. There's no carve-out for that, partially so a president or vice president couldn't just pass the office back and forth until one of them dies, or somebody could run for every other office. So what about the being VP bait and switch thing? Well, if you're only looking at the 22nd Amendment, it's in there too. The second sentence of the 22nd Amendment says, no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. Essentially, what that means, that if a vice president serves half of a presidential term as president, they can't get 2 4-year terms. The best they can get is 6 years in the White House. So with Trump having already served 1 full term as president, he'd be disqualified of that because he's already been elected to the presidency once. And then when you add in the 12th Amendment there, which says you're not allowed to be vice president if you can't be president, and since Trump is currently serving a 2nd term, he can't then go back to be vice president because he's not qualified to be president. I hope that makes sense. In the end, there just isn't a legal way for Trump to get a 3rd term. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to try. I wrote about this back in March on the Make It Make Sense Substack, that Trump could very well just not leave in January of 2029 like he tried to do in 2020. There are already plans being made by election deniers in positions in the administration and in states across the country to try to undermine the midterm elections next year through actively targeting state election systems and protocols and the redistricting fights that I've talked a ton about on the show already. And about 1 in 3 members of Congress right now are election deniers who would likely vote against the results of an election where Trump would lose. Now, he could also impose some sort of military law, although nearly all those attempts to send National Guard troops to cities right now have not held up in courts for the most part. So it would be hard to see a way in which military law could be instated. But no matter what he ends up doing, it hasn't stopped him from passing out and selling Trump 2028 merch to, own the libs, but also test the loyalty of members of his own party. Like I said in one of the last episodes last week, he was giving out swags of Trump 28 campaign gear to Republican senators who met him in the Oval Office. And then just today, the senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, was asked about Trump running for a 3rd term. Take a listen.
Senator, is it constitutional for President Trump to run for a 3rd term? He's teasing that.
If you read the Constitution, it says it's not. But if he says he has some different circumstances that might be able to go around the Constitution, but that's up to him. We got a long way to go.
But you're open to it.
Well, I think that there's going to have to be an evaluation from President Trump's viewpoint to the Constitution. There'll be a lot of legal aspects to it. Will it happen? It's very unlikely, but don't ever close the book on President Trump.
Okay, so that is the sound of a very nervous old man. Now, first, he says the Constitution says Trump can't do it, which, in any normal world would be the end of that sentence. But then he says that Trump has different circumstances, which I have no idea what those could be. And then, because Tuberville knows that Trump will come down on him hard for not backing up an idea of a third term, he has to say that, never count Trump out even when I say it's illegal. Tuberville also knows that if he pisses off Trump, he's risking hurting his home state, especially his home state of Alabama, which is about to need a lot of help giving food to about 750,000 people and health care to nearly 500,000 people because Alabama saw a 200% increase in Obamacare recipients in the last 5 years, and Trump is already withholding funding from states he's upset with, also very likely illegally, but that's a different episode. And it's not just Republican senators who were on board with this idea of Trump as a third-term president. According to polling from Data for Progress, 53% of Republicans think Trump should run for a third term, and 52% say presidents should be allowed to run for 3 terms no matter who the president is. Although that's one of those numbers like how we feel about the economy that tends to flip-flop depending on how you feel about the current guy in office. But on the whole, the idea of Trump or anyone serving more than 2 terms as president is very unpopular. 70% of all Americans do not want to see 3-term presidents, regardless of party. And when they were asked if Trump specifically should run for a 3rd term, 69%, almost the exact same number, said no. So this idea isn't popular, and not to mention one that might be impossible, not just legally, but physically. Trump will be 82 years old when this term ends. The life expectancy for a man in the U.S. is 76 years old. So at 79 right now, he's already in statistical overtime. Not to be grim or glib either, but he's an old dude. And I actually think that gets us to this next thing that's related to all this 3rd-term talk, and that's Trump's health. So also aboard Air Force One this week, in between talking about his 3rd term and his golf game, Trump surprised the press by saying he'd undergone an MRI.
I did. I got an MRI. It was perfect. Yeah. I gave you the full results. We had an MRI, and in the machine, the whole thing, and it was perfect. Yeah.
Can you say what in particular they were looking for?
You could ask the doctors.
Now, I know that people are going to be like, "What's the big deal?" But an MRI is not generally considered preventative medicine. In fact, most doctors right now believe that doing these brand new full-body MRIs on healthy people can actually do more harm than good. Or as one doctor from the University of Michigan put it, new whole-body MRI scans are scans that seek out incidental findings, which make the results seem more alarming than they are. So generally, the doctor treating the president, and he's got one with him at all times, that's for safety precautions for all presidents, they wouldn't want to alarm the leader of the free world, especially this one. So an MRI is probably done for a reason. Now, we know the president has a condition called chronic venous insufficiency, which means his veins can't help his blood flow back to his heart as well as they used to. It's what causes the swelling in his legs and ankles that we've been seeing. It's also been shown in studies to be an indicator or frequently associated with heart disease or sometimes congenital heart failure, something a doctor would possibly use an MRI to keep tabs on, though we do not know what this MRI was for. But the revelation that Trump underwent an MRI is also important in and of itself. Back in August, Trump went in for his 2nd annual physical at Walter Reed Hospital, which was odd because the White House seemed to lie initially by saying it was for his routine yearly checkup, even though he had just done one 6 months before. And now this kind of a procedure, this MRI, would generally have been noted in the report about the president's health after that 2nd annual visit when it happened, because the American people have a right to know certain things about their president's health. And I know that it's here that people are going to say, well, what about Biden? And that's a fair question. And I think the fair answer is, if the media dropped the ball on Biden and you're upset about that, you shouldn't want them to be allowed to continue to drop the ball for the next president because it's Donald Trump who pretends the media is out to get him. Now, Trump also confused a dementia test with an IQ test in this same impromptu question-taking on Air Force One. He talked about it while insulting Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jasmine Crockett, both women of color, which I make that a point to say because he always calls women of color low IQ. But here's what he said.
They have Jasmine Crockett, a low IQ person. They have AOC's low IQ. If you give her an IQ test, have her pass like the exams that I decided to take when I was at Walter Reed. Those are very hard, they're really aptitude tests, I guess, in a certain way, but they're cognitive tests. Let AOC go against Trump.
Okay.
Let Jasmine go against Trump. I don't think Jasmine, the first couple of questions are easy. A tiger, an elephant, a giraffe, When you get up to about 5 or 6, and then when you get up to 10 and 20 and 25, they couldn't come close to answering any of those questions.
All right, so I don't know if Trump is being told these are aptitude or IQ tests, or he just thinks that all cognitive tests are IQ tests, but what he's specifically referencing here is something called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which is not used on IQ, but to look for signs of impairment related to things like Alzheimer's, dementia, tumors, and vascular insufficiency or heart failure affecting the brain. So that means his doctors are looking for cognitive impairments and are keeping track of that. Again, not generally part of preventative care, even for the elderly without presenting symptoms. Also, for what it's worth, the most current test available for that Montreal test has a horse, a tiger, and a duck on it, not an elephant or a giraffe. And when he says when you get to level 6 or 15 or 20 or 25, we're talking about the ability to recall words the doctor had read aloud just a few minutes ago in the test, and then the time, date, and city the person is taking the test in and at. And it seems that Trump is indicating here that those are pretty hard. So not really, a vote of confidence there. But all of that combined with the bruising on his hands that we've seen roughly about once a month, which the White House says is from shaking too many hands. Weird. There was the extreme face drooping that we saw at the 9/11 memorial that seemingly went unanswered. I know I didn't get an answer from the White House when I asked them about it. And then back in August when he went MIA for about a week without any photos or videos, which was very odd for him. And his recent military speech to generals where he said he was afraid of stairs and also seemed to be very frail and weak while speaking to them. And then just today, when he landed in Japan at the welcoming ceremony, he had to be guided around the room, carefully down the podium steps, and then he stopped in front of a band that was playing some music and seemed to get lost before the new Japanese prime minister had to guide him away, and then he sort of lumbered around the room for a little before going back up to the podium for more pictures. It was weird, and he looked old. And now I will say, flying to Japan in a one shot like that is draining for anybody. Jet lag affects people differently, and that definitely could have been happening here. But it doesn't help after he's divulged this stuff about his health. And despite Trump saying that he's in perfect health with the same dimensions as an NFL quarterback or his own personal physician saying just a few years ago that he could live to 200, or even that he's in excellent health right now, which his physician just said, we're just not getting the signs that that's the case. And again, people are going to bring up that the press didn't say these things when Biden was in office. And I argue that a lot of people actually did. And there was a lot of lack of honesty from the White House, but plenty of people were talking about it. And even if they weren't, again, just because we as the press were in the wrong then, doesn't mean we have to be in the wrong now. Everyone, no matter who you voted for, should want the president to be open about their health and their ability to do the job. But back to Trump here, because there's also another interesting thing that he's been doing lately, and it's talking about getting into heaven, or rather, not getting in. He's said frequently over the past few months that he's worrying about his soul, which is interesting because it means to some degree he's been thinking about his own death. And that, I think, is actually where Trump's health and his talk of a third term connect. For Trump, a third term isn't just about staying in power, but a way for him to cement his legacy. I've talked before about this show and on the Substack about how Trump is pulling from the authoritarian playbook when it comes to things like beautifying D.C., remaking portions of it. Clearly his need to build a ballroom or a triumphal arch on the National Mall in his honor is all about legacy. But having a third term, or at least some of it, would be too. It would make him the second president to ever have served any length of a term beyond 2 terms, and would put him in the history books that exact way next to FDR. So if his health isn't really as perfect as he's claiming it is, running for a 3rd term, or fighting for one, might be part of his way of trying to write the end of his own story. All right, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. It really helps the show out there. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new article dropping tomorrow, although that will be just for paid subscribers. It's just $5 a month to get access to that article and a whole bunch of other ones. Although if you're a free subscriber, you will get access to the free newsletters that come out each week. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.